The lecture hall was cold. Not cold like the winters back home in Korea, but cold in a different way. The kind of cold that came from metal walls and recycled air, and the knowledge that outside those walls was nothing but empty space. Una Park sat in the back row of the classroom, her small notebook open on the desk in front of her. She was the only human in a room of 40 alien students. Some of them had scales, some had fur, some had shells that clicked when they moved. One student near the front had no body at all, just a floating cloud of blue gas inside a special container. Una had been at the Galactic Academy for 6 months now. She was used to being different. She was used to the stares, the whispers, the way some aliens moved away from her in the food hall like she carried some kind of disease. Humans were new to the galactic community. They had only discovered faster-than-light travel 20 years ago. To most aliens, humans were like children who had just learned to walk. Professor Thorne stood at the front of the room. He was tall, almost 3 meters, with a body like a giant insect. He had 4 arms, 2 large compound eyes, and mandibles that clicked together when he spoke. His species came from a warm planet called Melox, where the temperature never dropped below 20 degrees. Today's lesson was about extreme environment survival. The holographic display behind Professor Thorne showed images of a white and gray planet covered in ice and snow. The planet was called Cryos 4, and it was famous across the galaxy as one of the most dangerous worlds ever discovered. "Class," Professor Thorne said, his voice sharp and clear through the translator implant in Una's ear, "observe the planet before you. Cryos 4. Average surface temperature, -60 degrees. Wind speeds during storms can reach 200 kilometers per hour. The ice is so cold that it can freeze exposed flesh in less than 5 minutes." The holographic display changed to show a list of species names. There were 17 names on the list. "These are the species that have attempted to colonize Cryos 4, the professor continued. "The Melox, the Varn, the Blue Giants of Sector 7, all of them failed. All of them were forced to abandon their colonies within the first year. Many of them died." A student near the front raised a tentacle. "Professor, what about the thornback species? They have natural armor." Professor Thorne made a sound that might have been a laugh. "The thornbacks lasted 3 months. Their armor cracked in the cold like old pottery. They lost 60% of their expedition before they gave up." Una wrote notes in her book. The information was interesting. She had always loved learning about different planets and different environments. Back on Earth, she had studied environmental science at Seoul National University. She had joined the exchange program to learn more about how other species survived on their worlds. But as the lesson continued, Una began to feel uncomfortable. Professor Thorne kept looking at her. Not just glancing, but really looking, with those big compound eyes fixed on her face. "Now," the professor said, "let us discuss which species are most vulnerable to extreme cold environments." The display changed again. This time it showed a diagram of a human body, Una's body, or at least a body that looked exactly like hers. "Humans," Professor Thorne announced, "are perhaps the weakest species in the known galaxy when it comes to temperature survival." The class turned to look at Una. She felt her face grow warm. "Observe the human form," the professor continued. "No fur, no scales, no shell, no blubber. Their skin is thin and soft like the skin of a newborn Melox larva. They have no natural insulation whatsoever." One of the alien students, a large creature covered in thick white fur, made a low rumbling sound. It was laughing. "Humans also have extremely fragile internal temperature regulation," Professor Thorne went on. "If their core body temperature drops by just 2 degrees, they begin to experience confusion and loss of muscle control. A drop of 5 degrees causes unconsciousness. A drop of 10 degrees causes death." More students laughed. The sound filled the room like a wave. "Based on my calculations," the professor said, A human being placed on the surface of Cryos 4 would survive for approximately 30 minutes, perhaps less if there was wind. Yuna's hand moved before she could stop it. She raised it high in the air. Professor Thorne's mandibles clicked together. Yes, human student. With respect, Professor, Yuna said, keeping her voice calm and steady, your calculations may not be complete. The room went silent. No one interrupted Professor Thorne. No one questioned him. He had been teaching at the academy for 200 years. He was considered one of the greatest experts on planetary survival in the entire quadrant. Explain, the professor said. His voice was cold now, like the planet on the screen behind him. Humans have survived ice ages, Yuna said. Thousands of years ago, much of Earth was covered in ice. The temperatures were similar to Cryos 4, but humans did not die. They survived. They adapted. Professor Thorne walked toward her, his 4 legs clicking on the metal floor. Primitive luck, he said. Nothing more. Your ancestors hid in caves and waited for the weather to change. That is not survival. That is hiding. We built shelters, Yuna replied. We made clothing. We learned to use the environment instead of fighting it. The professor stopped in front of her desk. He was so tall that Yuna had to lean back to look at his face. His compound eyes reflected her image back at her, small and fragile. Child, he said, I have studied 2,000 species across 400 planets. I have seen creatures with bodies of living metal. I have seen beings that can survive in the vacuum of space. And I am telling you, with 200 years of knowledge and research, that humans are among the weakest creatures in the galaxy. You have no natural weapons, no natural armor, no natural resistance to any extreme environment. He leaned closer. If I placed you on Cryos 4 right now, you would be dead before you could finish crying for help. The class erupted in laughter again. Even the blue gas students seemed to be shaking with amusement. Yuna closed her notebook. She did not argue anymore. She did not raise her voice or make angry faces. She simply sat there, quiet and still, while the laughter washed over her. But inside her mind, something changed. A small fire began to burn. Not a fire of anger, but a fire of determination. That night, Yuna returned to her small room on the station. She sat on her bed and looked out the window at the stars. Somewhere out there was Cryos 4, cold and deadly and waiting. She picked up her communication device and opened a channel. The signal would take a few hours to reach its destination, but that was fine. She had time. Brother, she said into the device, I need your help. Someone here thinks humans are weak. I want to prove them wrong. Across the galaxy, on a cargo ship somewhere between Earth and the outer colonies, a man named D. Park received his sister's message. He listened to every word, and when it was finished, he smiled. He had been waiting his whole life for a challenge like this. 3 days passed after the lecture. In that time, Professor Thorne's words spread across the station like fire through dry grass. The academic news channel played a recording of his speech on repeat. Aliens in the food hall pointed at Yuna and whispered to each other. Some of them smiled in a way that was not friendly. 30 minutes, they would say when she walked past. That is all you would last, 30 minutes. Yuna ignored them. She went to her classes. She studied her books. She ate her meals alone at a small table in the corner of the food hall, and every night she waited for a reply from her brother. On the 4th day, the reply came. I received your message, Dee's voice said through the communication device. I watched the recording of your professor's lecture. I saw how they laughed at you. Yuna pressed the device close to her ear, as if she could somehow be closer to her brother through the machine. I am coming, Dee continued. I will be there in 1 week, and when I arrive, I will show these aliens something they will never forget. Tell your professor to prepare himself. He is about to learn what humans are really made of. The message ended. Yuna sat on her bed and smiled for the first time in days. D. Park was not like other humans. He had spent 15 years in the Korean Special Forces, surviving training exercises that would break most people. He had lived through winters in the mountains where the temperature dropped to -40 degrees. He had eaten snow for water and slept in holes dug into frozen ground. After leaving the military, he had become a survival consultant for interstellar freight crews, teaching them how to stay alive if their ships crashed on hostile planets. If anyone could prove Professor Thorne wrong, it was D. The week passed slowly. Yuna continued to attend classes, continued to endure the mockery of her classmates, continued to keep her silence. She told no one about her brother. She wanted it to be a surprise. On the 7th day, a small transport ship arrived at the station. Yuna was waiting at the docking port when the doors opened. D walked out carrying a single bag over his shoulder. He was not tall, maybe 170 centimeters, but his body was solid and strong like a tree trunk. His face was weathered from years of outdoor living, with deep lines around his eyes and a scar on his left cheek from an old training accident. He wore simple clothes, a thick wool jacket, dark pants, and leather boots that looked older than Yuna herself. "Little sister," he said, opening his arms. Yuna ran to him and hugged him tight. She had not seen him in 2 years. The smell of his jacket was familiar, like pine trees and campfire smoke. "Thank you for coming," she whispered. Dee pulled back and looked at her face. "You have been sad," he said. It was not a question. "They do not respect us here," Yuna replied. "They think we are weak, they think we are nothing." Dee nodded slowly. "Then we will change their minds. Take me to your professor." Yuna arranged a meeting through the official academic channels. It took 2 days for the request to be approved, but finally, a time was set. The meeting would take place in the main faculty chamber, and all senior professors were invited to attend. The chamber was large and circular, with seats rising in levels around a central speaking floor. When Yuna and Dee entered, more than 50 alien professors were already seated, watching them with curious eyes. Professor Thorne sat in the highest seat, looking down at the 2 humans like a king looking at peasants. "You requested this meeting," Professor Thorne said. "State your purpose." Dee walked to the center of the floor. He did not seem nervous. He did not seem afraid. He stood with his feet planted wide and his hands clasped behind his back, like a soldier giving a report to his commanding officer. "My name is D. Park," he said. "I am the brother of your student, Yuna Park. I am here because you insulted my species. You said that humans cannot survive on the ice planet Cryos 4. You said we would die in 30 minutes. Professor Thorne's mandibles clicked together. "I stated a scientific fact. It was not an insult." "Then let me give you a scientific experiment," Dee replied. "Drop me on Cryos 4. Give me no thermal suit. Give me no heating technology. Give me only basic hand tools and the clothes I am wearing right now. I will survive for 1 hour on the surface." The room erupted in noise. Alien professors shouted in a dozen different languages. Some laughed. Some argued with each other. One professor, a small creature covered in blue feathers, stood up and pointed at Dee. "This is suicide," the feathered professor said. "You are asking us to help you kill yourself." "I am asking you to watch me survive," Dee answered calmly. Professor Thorne raised one of his 4 arms, and the room fell silent. "You wish to die for pride?" the insected professor asked. "You wish to freeze on an alien world just to prove a point?" Dee smiled. It was a small smile, but it was real. "I wish to teach you something about my species," he said. "Humans do not survive because we are strong. We do not survive because we are fast or tough or built for extreme environments. We survive because we are clever. We survive because we never give up. We survive because, when the galaxy throws something terrible at us, we find a way to beat it." He paused and looked around the room at all the alien faces watching him. "You have studied many species," Dee continued. "You have seen creatures with armor and creatures with fur and creatures that can live in the vacuum of space. But I think you have never really studied humans. I think you have looked at our soft skin and our fragile bodies and decided that we are weak. You did not look at our history. You did not look at what we have overcome." Professor Thorne leaned forward in his seat. "And what have you overcome, human?" "Ice ages," Dee said. "Deserts, mountains, oceans, plagues, famines, wars that nearly destroyed our entire world. Every time something tried to kill us, we survived, not because of our bodies, because of our minds." The room was silent now. Even the alien professors who had been laughing before were listening carefully. "So here is my proposal," Dee said. "Drop me on Cryos 4 with only basic tools. No thermal technology, no heated shelter, nothing that my ancestors did not have 10,000 years ago. If I die, you prove your point. You can tell the entire galaxy that humans are weak. You can use my death as evidence in your lectures for the next 200 years." He took a step toward Professor Thorne. "But if I survive, you must retract your statement. You must stand before your students and tell them that you were wrong about humans. You must tell them that we are not weak. We are something else entirely." Professor Thorne stared at Dee for a long moment. His compound eyes reflected the lights of the chamber like two dark mirrors. "The broadcast rights," another professor said from somewhere in the room. "If we record this event, we could sell the broadcast rights across a dozen systems. The profit would be enormous." "I do not care about profit," Dee said. "I care about truth. I care about showing the galaxy what humans can do." Professor Thorne rose from his seat. He walked down the steps slowly, his 4 legs making sharp clicking sounds on the metal floor. When he reached the speaking floor, he stood directly in front of Dee. The insectoid professor was almost twice the human's height. "Very well," Professor Thorne said. "I accept your challenge. You will be dropped on Cryos 4 in 3 days. You will have 1 hour to survive. If you live, I will admit that I was wrong." He extended one of his 4 arms. "Do we have an agreement, human?" Dee reached out and shook the alien's hand. "We do," he said. Across the galaxy, news of the challenge spread like lightning. 17 billion beings tuned in to follow the story. Betting pools opened on 1,000 worlds. Most bets were against the humans surviving. But in her small room on the station, Una Park looked out at the stars and smiled. She knew something that the aliens did not know. She knew her brother. And she knew that when D. Park set his mind to something, nothing in the galaxy could stop him. Not even the cold. The shuttle descended through thick gray clouds that seemed to have no end. Inside, D. Park sat alone on a metal bench, his single bag at his feet. Through the small window beside him, he could see nothing but swirling ice and snow. Above the planet, 17 billion viewers watched from their homes, their ships, their stations scattered across the galaxy. The broadcast was being transmitted on every major channel. Commentators from a dozen species talked over each other, trying to explain what was about to happen. "The human has no chance," said one commentator, a large reptilian creature with golden scales. "My species has thick skin designed for cold climates, and even we would struggle on Cryos 4. This soft creature will freeze in minutes." In the observation ship orbiting high above the planet, Professor Thorne watched the shuttle's descent on a large screen. Beside him sat Una Park, her hands clasped tight in her lap. She had been given special permission to watch from the observation ship. The professor had seemed pleased to invite her, perhaps wanting her to witness her brother's failure up close. The shuttle broke through the bottom of the clouds, and suddenly the surface of Cryos 4 became visible. It was a world of white and gray, endless plains of ice stretching to the horizon in every direction. Mountains rose in the distance like teeth made of frozen stone. The sky was the color of old metal, heavy with clouds that promised more snow. The temperature reading on the broadcast display showed -58 degrees. Wind speed, 40 kilometers per hour. Humidity, near zero. The air itself was so cold that breathing it would burn the lungs of most creatures. The shuttle landed on a flat section of ice about 2 kilometers from the nearest rock formation. The engines powered down, and for a moment, everything was silent. Then the door opened. Dee stepped out onto the surface of Cryos 4. The cold hit him immediately, pressing against his face like a wall of invisible needles. He had prepared himself for this moment, had trained his body and mind for years, but still, the intensity of it took his breath away. He was wearing layers of wool clothing, including a thick coat that his grandmother had made for him when he was young. The coat was old now, patched in several places, but it had kept him warm through many winters in the Korean mountains. His hands were covered in leather gloves lined with rabbit fur. His boots were heavy and solid, designed for walking on ice. In his hands he carried 2 tools, a short saw with a curved blade and a flat knife shaped like a crescent moon. These were the same tools his ancestors had used to survive on Earth thousands of years ago. They had no batteries, no power sources, no advanced technology. They were just metal and wood and leather, simple and strong. The shuttle lifted off behind him, its engines roaring as it rose back toward the clouds. Within seconds, Dee was alone on the frozen plain. Professor Thorne's voice came through the broadcast speakers, narrating for the billions of viewers watching across the galaxy. "The human is now on the surface," the professor said. "Notice how he is already shivering. His body is losing heat rapidly. At this rate, his core temperature will begin dropping within minutes. Without shelter or heat, hypothermia will set in within 15 minutes. Death will follow within 30. Yuna watched her brother on the screen. She could see him standing in the wind, looking around at the endless white landscape. She could see the way his breath turned to fog in the cold air. She could see the determination in his eyes. "Come on, brother," she whispered. "Show them." Dee did not waste time. He walked quickly across the ice, his boots crunching on the frozen surface, until he found what he was looking for, a patch of packed snow that had been pressed hard by the wind. The snow here was dense and solid, perfect for what he needed to do. He dropped to his knees and began to work. First, he used the saw to cut into the snow. The blade moved back and forth, slicing through the packed ice like a knife through hard cheese. Within a minute, he had cut a rectangular block about the size of a small television. He lifted the block carefully and set it aside. Then he cut another, and another, and another. On the broadcast, the alien commentators fell silent. They had never seen anything like this before. "What is he doing?" the golden-scaled reptilian asked. "Is he digging a hole to hide in?" "No," another commentator replied, a small insected creature similar to Professor Thorne. "He is building something, but what?" Dee worked faster now, his movements becoming more efficient as his body warmed up from the activity. Block after block emerged from the snow, each one cut to a precise size and shape. He arranged them in a circle on the ground, leaning each block slightly inward at an angle. 3 minutes passed, 4, 5. The wind picked up, throwing ice crystals into Dee's face. His exposed skin burned with cold. His fingers, even inside the fur-lined gloves, were starting to lose feeling. But he did not stop. He could not stop. He added a second layer of blocks on top of the first, placing them slightly further inward than the layer below. The circle was getting smaller as it rose, creating a dome shape. Each block fit perfectly against its neighbors, the weight and angle holding them in place without any glue or nails. Professor Thorne leaned closer to the screen, his compound eyes wide with confusion. "This is impossible," he said. "Snow cannot support weight like that. The structure should collapse." Yuna smiled but said nothing. 6 minutes passed, 7, 8. The dome was nearly complete now. Dee had left a small hole at the top for air to escape, and he was working on the final row of blocks that would close the roof. His hands were moving so fast that they were almost a blur, cutting and lifting, and placing with the precision of a machine. At 8.5 minutes, he began building the entrance tunnel. This was important, perhaps the most important part of the entire structure. He cut a small doorway in the base of the dome, then created a tunnel that curved away from the wind direction. The tunnel was low and narrow, designed to block the cold air from rushing inside. 9 minutes passed. D placed the final block, sealing the entrance tunnel from the top. Then he crawled inside and disappeared from the external cameras. The broadcast switched to thermal imaging. On the screen, the alien viewers could see the shape of the dome glowing with different colors. The outside was dark blue, almost black, showing temperatures of -58 degrees. But inside, where D was now sitting, the colors were different. Yellow, orange, warm. Professor Thorne stared at the screen in disbelief. "The interior temperature," he said slowly, reading the data display, "is -6 degrees. That is over 50 degrees warmer than the outside air." The observation room erupted in noise. Alien professors shouted questions at each other. Commentators across the galaxy struggled to explain what they were seeing. "What is that structure?" one of the professors asked. "What did he build?" Una stood up from her seat. Every eye in the room turned to look at her. "It is called an igloo," she said, her voice clear and proud. "Humans invented it thousands of years ago. The snow blocks trap air, and air is one of the best insulators in the universe. The dome shape distributes weight evenly, preventing collapse, and the curved entrance tunnel stops cold wind from entering while allowing warm air to stay inside." She looked directly at Professor Thorne. "My ancestors built shelters like this when your species was still learning to walk. They survived ice ages that covered half of our planet. They did not have technology. They did not have advanced tools. They had only their minds and their hands and their will to live." Inside the igloo, D sat with his back against the curved wall. His body heat was slowly warming the small space, raising the temperature degree by degree. He pulled out his pack and removed a small bundle wrapped in cloth, dried fish and rice cakes, traditional Korean survival food that his grandmother had taught him to make when he was a child. He ate slowly, chewing each bite carefully to extract every bit of energy from the food. The wind howled outside, throwing snow against the walls of his shelter, but inside D was warm. He looked at his watch. 9 minutes and 43 seconds since he had stepped off the shuttle. He had 50 more minutes to go. But looking around at the solid walls of his igloo, feeling the warmth building in the small space, D knew that 50 minutes would not be a problem. He could stay here for hours, days even. Above him, 17 billion viewers watched in stunned silence as the impossible became possible. A human, soft and fragile and weak, had turned snow into shelter. He had turned the cold into a tool. And he had done it all in less than 10 minutes. Inside the igloo, time moved slowly. D could hear the wind screaming outside, throwing ice and snow against the walls of his shelter with a sound like sand hitting glass. But inside, the air was still and quiet. He had been in the igloo for 30 minutes now. The interior temperature had risen to -2 degrees, almost 60 degrees warmer than the frozen wasteland outside. His body heat, trapped by the dome of packed snow, had turned a hole in the ice into a warm shelter. D removed his outer gloves and flexed his fingers. They were stiff but functional. He rubbed his hands together, creating friction, creating warmth. In the Korean mountains, he had learned that the biggest danger in extreme cold was not the temperature itself. The biggest danger was giving up. The moment you stopped moving, stopped thinking, stopped fighting, that was the moment the cold won. He ate another piece of dried fish. The salty taste reminded him of his grandmother's kitchen back in Korea, the smell of cooking food and the warmth of the wood fire. She had been the one to teach him how to survive in the cold. She had grown up during a time when Korea was poor and resources were limited. She had learned to make do with nothing, to find solutions where others saw only problems. "The cold is not your enemy," she used to tell him. "Fear is your enemy. The cold is just cold. It does not want to kill you. It simply is. Learn to work with it and you will survive. Fight against it and you will die." Dee smiled at the memory. Grandmother had never left Earth, had never traveled to space, had never met an alien. But she had understood something that Professor Thorne, with all his 200 years of study, had never learned. Survival was not about strength, it was about wisdom. High above the planet in the observation ship, the mood had changed completely. The alien professors who had laughed at Una in the classroom were now silent, staring at the screens with expressions of disbelief. Professor Thorne sat in his command chair, his 4 arms crossed over his chest. His compound eyes were fixed on the thermal imaging display, watching the warm orange glow of Dee's body inside the cold blue of the igloo. "I do not understand," one of the professors said. He was a tall creature covered in thick white fur, the same species that had laughed loudest during the lecture. "Snow is frozen water. It is cold. How can cold material provide warmth?" Una was about to answer when another voice spoke up. A new figure had appeared on the broadcast, a human woman with short black hair and sharp eyes behind thin glasses. Her name appeared on the screen as Dr. Hannah Lim, from the Seoul Institute of Space Sciences. "If I may explain," Dr. Lim said. She was speaking from Earth, her image transmitted across the light years to join the broadcast. "Snow is not just frozen water. Snow contains millions of tiny air pockets trapped between the ice crystals, and air is one of the best thermal insulators in the known universe." The broadcast display changed to show a diagram of snow structure, zoomed in to show the microscopic air gaps between crystals. "When a human builds an igloo," Dr. Lim continued, "they are creating a shell of insulation around themselves. The snow blocks the wind. The air pockets in the snow slow down heat transfer, and the dome shape traps the warmest air at the top of the structure, where it circulates back down to warm the occupant." Professor Thorne's mandibles clicked together. "But this is primitive. This is something that creatures without technology would do." "Yes," Dr. Lim replied calmly, "and that is exactly the point. Humans developed this technique over 10,000 years ago, during a period we call the Ice Age. At that time, large portions of Earth were covered in glaciers and frozen wastelands similar to Cryos 4. Our ancestors had no advanced technology. They had stone tools and animal skins and their own intelligence." She paused, letting her words sink in. "And they survived, not for 30 minutes, not for 1 hour. They survived for thousands of years. They raised families. They built communities. They developed culture and art and language, all while living in conditions that your species considers impossible to survive." The observation room was completely silent. Even the most arrogant professors had nothing to say. Inside the igloo, Dee was now completely comfortable. He had removed his outer coat and was using it as a cushion to sit on. The interior temperature had stabilized at just below zero, cold by most standards but perfectly survivable for a human who knew what he was doing. He checked his watch. 45 minutes had passed since he stepped off the shuttle, only 15 more minutes until he won the challenge. But Dee had already decided that 15 minutes was not enough. He wanted to make a statement that no one in the galaxy would ever forget. He activated the small communication device in his pocket. "This is D Park," he said. "I am requesting an extension of the challenge. Instead of 1 hour, I will remain on the surface for 6 hours." The broadcast commentators exploded with surprise. On the observation ship, Professor Thorne rose from his seat. "This is madness," the professor said. "You have proven your point. There is no need to risk your life further." Dee's voice came through the speakers, calm and steady. "I am not risking my life. I am comfortable. I am warm. I have food and shelter. I could stay here for days if necessary." He paused. "But I think 6 hours will be enough to make my point. 6 hours should be enough to show the galaxy what humans are capable of. Professor Thorne looked at Una. She was smiling, her eyes bright with pride. "Let him continue," she said. "My brother knows what he is doing." The 6 hours passed slowly, but they passed without incident. Dee ate his food, did exercises inside the limited space to keep his blood flowing, and occasionally stepped outside to gather more snow to reinforce his walls. Each time he left the igloo, the cameras captured his calm face and steady movements. He did not shiver. He did not panic. He moved like a man who was completely at home in his environment. The viewership numbers continued to climb. By the end of the 4th hour, over 30 billion beings were watching the broadcast. It had become the most viewed event in galactic history. Commentators from dozens of species tried to explain what they were seeing. They talked about human evolution, about Earth's ice ages, about the remarkable adaptability of the human mind. Some of them admitted that they had underestimated humans. Others tried to find excuses, claiming that Dee was exceptional, that most humans could not do what he was doing. But Dee himself addressed this during the 5th hour, speaking directly to the cameras through his communication device. "I am not special," he said. "Any human child could learn to build an igloo. We teach this skill in our schools. We teach it to our young people as part of their education. On Earth, there are communities where people still live in igloos for months at a time, not because they have to, but because they choose to." He picked up a handful of snow and let it fall through his fingers. "This is not magic. This is not a special power that only I possess. This is human knowledge, passed down from generation to generation for 10,000 years. My grandmother taught me, her grandmother taught her, and her grandmother's grandmother learned from ancestors who survived the ice ages." He looked directly at the camera. "We are not the biggest species in the galaxy. We are not the strongest or the fastest, but we remember, we learn, we adapt, and we never ever give up." When the 6 hours were complete, a shuttle descended through the clouds to retrieve Dee from the surface. He emerged from his igloo with a smile on his face, waving at the cameras as if he had just completed a morning walk instead of surviving on the deadliest ice planet in the known galaxy. The shuttle door opened, and warm air rushed out. But before he stepped inside, Dee turned back to look at his igloo one last time. The small dome of snow sat quietly on the frozen plain, already beginning to accumulate a thin layer of fresh powder from the wind. He had built it in less than 10 minutes. It had kept him alive for 6 hours, and it would probably remain standing for months, a monument to human ingenuity on an alien world. Dee smiled and stepped into the shuttle. The door closed behind him, and the ship rose toward the stars. He had made his point. Now it was time for Professor Thorne to make his. 1 week after Dee Park walked off the surface of Cryos 4, the Galactic Academy held a special assembly. Every seat in the main auditorium was filled. Students and professors from across the quadrant had traveled to the station to witness what was about to happen. Those who could not attend in person watched through broadcast screens, joining the billions of viewers who had followed the story from the beginning. Una sat in the front row, directly below the speaking platform. Beside her was Dee, still wearing the wool coat that their grandmother had made. He had refused to change it for something newer or more fashionable. The coat had kept him alive on Cryos 4, and he would wear it with pride for the rest of his life. The auditorium fell silent as Professor Thorne walked onto the platform. His 4 legs clicked on the metal floor, a sound that echoed through the vast space. He moved slowly, deliberately, like a creature that had suddenly become unsure of its own steps. When he reached the center of the platform, he stopped and looked out at the audience. His compound eyes moved across the rows of faces, human and alien alike, all watching him with curious expectation. "I have been a professor at this academy for 214 years, he began. His voice was different now, softer than before, without the sharp edge of confidence that had always defined his lectures. In that time, I have studied 2,317 species across 489 planets. I have written 47 books on planetary survival. I have been called one of the greatest experts on extreme environment adaptation in the entire quadrant. He paused and lowered his head. I was wrong. A wave of whispers moved through the audience. Professor Thorne raised one of his forearms, and the room fell silent again. For 2 centuries, I believed that survival in extreme environments required biological superiority. I believed that species survived because they evolved thick hides or dense fur or redundant organ systems. I believed that the body was the key to survival, and that species with weak bodies were destined to fail. He turned to look directly at Yuna and Dee. Humans have weak bodies. By every metric I used to measure survival capability, humans should be among the least successful species in the galaxy. They have no natural weapons, no natural armor, no natural resistance to temperature extremes. By my calculations, a human on Cryos 4 should have died within 30 minutes. He bowed his head lower, a gesture of deep respect that was foreign to his species. He had spent days learning how to do it properly. I was wrong, he said again. D. Park did not simply survive on Cryos 4. He made himself comfortable. He built a shelter from the very ice that should have killed him. He turned the environment from an enemy into a tool. The professor's voice grew stronger now, filled with a new understanding. I have spent my entire career studying how species adapt their bodies to their environments. I never considered the possibility that a species might do the opposite. I never imagined that a creature could look at a frozen wasteland and see building materials. I never understood that survival could come from the mind instead of the body. He raised his head and looked out at the audience. Humans do not adapt themselves to the environment. They adapt the environment to themselves. They look at mountains and build tunnels through them. They look at rivers and build bridges across them. They look at oceans and build ships to sail them. And when they look at a world of ice and death, they build a shelter and make it home. The auditorium was completely silent. Every being in the room was listening with complete attention. This is a form of survival that I did not know existed, Professor Thorne continued. It is not biological evolution. It is something else, something that does not have a name in my language. But I have spent the past week studying human history, trying to understand how this species has survived so much with so little natural advantage. He clicked his mandibles together in what might have been a smile. Do you know what I found? Humans have survived ice ages that covered half their planet in frozen glaciers. They have survived plagues that killed millions of their population. They have survived wars that destroyed entire cities. They have survived famines and floods and volcanic eruptions and asteroid impacts. Again and again, throughout their history, humans have faced extinction. And again, they have refused to die. He walked to the edge of the platform, closer to where Yuna and Dee were sitting. On behalf of this academy and on behalf of my own arrogance, I formally withdraw my previous statements about humanity. Humans are not weak. They are not fragile. They are not the least capable species in the galaxy. He looked directly at Dee. They are something far more dangerous. They are clever, they are stubborn, they are creative, and they never ever give up. The professor bowed again, deeper this time. Thank you, D. Park, for teaching an old professor a lesson he should have learned long ago. And thank you, Yuna Park, for having the courage to defend your species when no one else would. The auditorium erupted in applause. Aliens from dozens of species rose to their feet, clapping and cheering and making whatever sounds their biology allowed. The noise was deafening, overwhelming, beautiful. Yuna felt tears forming in her eyes. She had waited so long for this moment. She had endured so much mockery, so much disrespect, so much loneliness in this place far from home. And now, finally, the galaxy was beginning to understand what humans really were. Dee reached over and took her hand. "Grandmother would be proud," he said softly. Yuna nodded, unable to speak. After the assembly, the park siblings walked through the corridors of the station. Students and professors moved aside to let them pass, nodding with respect as they went by. Some of them reached out to shake Dee's hand. Others simply stood and watched, still trying to process what they had witnessed. As they walked, Yuna noticed something strange. A group of young aliens was following them at a respectful distance. There were about a dozen of them, students from various species, all watching the two humans with eager eyes. "Brother," Yuna whispered, "we have followers." Dee glanced over his shoulder and smiled. "Let them come." When they reached the observation deck, with its wide windows looking out at the stars, Dee stopped and turned to face the group of students. "You have questions," he said. It was not a question. The students looked at each other nervously. Finally, one of them stepped forward. She was a young female from the fur-covered species that had laughed during Professor Thorne's lecture. Her white fur was tinged with blue at the tips, a sign of her youth. "I want to know," she said softly, "how you learned to build the snow shelter. Was it difficult? Could someone like me learn to do it?" Dee smiled at her. "What is your name?" "I am called Winter," the young alien replied. "Winter," Dee repeated. "A good name for someone asking about ice. Yes, you could learn to build an igloo. Anyone can learn. The technique is simple. The knowledge is available in human books and databases. But the most important thing is not the technique." He tapped his finger against his temple. "The most important thing is here. In your mind, you must believe that you can survive. You must refuse to give up no matter how cold it gets, no matter how impossible the situation seems. That is the real human secret, not our bodies, not our tools, our will." The students listened with wide eyes, absorbing every word. "My grandmother used to tell me a story," Dee continued. "Long ago, when humans were still learning to survive on Earth, there was a great winter that lasted for many years. The ice spread across the land and many species died, but humans survived. Do you know why?" The students shook their heads. "Because when the cold came, we did not run. We did not hide. We looked at the ice and we said, 'This is ours now. This is our home, and we will make it warm.'" He looked out at the stars, beyond the observation window. "The universe is vast and cold and dangerous. There are planets out there that would kill any of us in minutes, but humans have learned something over the long years of our history. The universe does not care about us. It does not want us to live or die. It simply is." He turned back to the students. "And that means that survival is not about being stronger than the universe. It is about being smarter. It is about taking what the universe gives you and turning it into something useful. Ice becomes shelter. Danger becomes opportunity. Fear becomes courage." The young alien named Winter stepped closer. "Will you teach us?" she asked. "Will you teach us how to think like humans?" Dee laughed, a warm sound that filled the observation deck. "I cannot teach you to think like humans," he said. "You have your own minds, your own histories, your own wisdom, but I can teach you what my grandmother taught me. I can teach you that the cold is not your enemy. Fear is your enemy. The cold is just cold." He put his arm around Yuna's shoulders. "And if you ever find yourself on an ice planet with nothing but your wits and your determination, I can teach you to build a shelter that will keep you alive." The students gathered closer, eager to learn. And in that moment, in an observation deck overlooking the infinite stars, something new was born. A connection between species, a sharing of knowledge, a recognition that intelligence and courage came in many forms, and that even the softest creature in the galaxy could survive the coldest night. Later, as the station turned slowly through the void of space, Yuna and Dee stood alone at the window. "What now?" Yuna asked. Dee was quiet for a moment, thinking. "Now," he said finally, "we go home. Grandmother will want to hear about this. And I think I need to thank her for making me that coat." Yuna laughed. "She will probably say she knew it all along." "She probably did," Dee agreed. They stood together in the starlight, two humans far from home, surrounded by a galaxy that had finally begun to understand what they were capable of. Outside, the stars burned cold and distant, but the Park siblings were not afraid. They had already proven that they could make warmth anywhere, even at the edge of the universe.